Hi everybody, Krista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we're going to be talking about New York immigration. And apparently this is a hot topic for some of you because there's over 400 of you already watching this live. I imagine a few thousand of you more will catch this on the replay on YouTube later. So lots to cover in a really short amount of time. Let's just dive right in today. First piece of advice or information that I want to give you is just about the major ports of arrival and departure. So we're going to focus, of course, on New York today, but oftentimes the story that your family came through New York is just information that's been passed down in your family. If you can't find them in New York passenger lists after I provide you with some information today, you might want to consider that they may have come through another port. Even if they ended up living in New York or New Jersey, doesn't necessarily mean that they came through the port of New York. They may have come through Boston or Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco. Those are the major ports of arrival. Of course, there are dozens and dozens more, as well as border crossings from Canada and Mexico into the United States. You also need to be aware of what the major ports of departure are out of England. Liverpool, of course, being one of the major ones. Then we've got Bremen and Hamburg out of Germany, Naples, Italy, and Antwerp, Belgium. Again, just because your family was from a place doesn't mean that that's the place that they left from. If your family was German, that doesn't necessarily mean they left from a German port. So be aware of what some of those other ports were, what some of their other options were. Grab a map, take a look at it, see what you can see, okay? One of the pieces of advice that I always give people when they're doing immigration research is to make sure to exhaust all U.S. resources before searching passenger lists. And I'll show you a few examples of passenger lists today, and so you'll have an idea of why that's so important. But a lot of times, again, we have family stories, and the better we can document those family stories, the closer we're going to get to finding what we're looking for. Also, it's useful because those U.S. resources sometimes will help you narrow down that search. Let me just give you a couple of examples of that. Of course, there are others, but here are the most immediate ones that come to mind. The 1900 census lists immigration information. And if you can't see this, you might want to you're probably in the web browser on live stream right now. In the middle of the screen, if you just hover over it, there should be a full screen option so that you can see what I'm looking at. There is a citizenship column on the 1900 census, and it will list the immigration year, how many years they've been in the United States, and then their naturalization status. So if I scroll down here, I can see there are several individuals on this particular census image that came to the United States, and the number of years they've been here. Interestingly enough, on this particular census image, there is no naturalization status on any of those. We'll look at that here on another image in just a minute. On the 1910 federal census for the United States, let me just make that a little bigger, the citizenship information is listed here in this column, columns 15 and 16. Again, you have the year of immigration and the naturalization status. Now, let's just run over naturalization status really quickly. NA means that they're naturalized. AL means that they're an alien citizen, and I don't know if I've got one on this image or not, but the other option would be PA, and PA means they've submitted their papers to become naturalized. So pay attention to that column on the census, again, so that you can narrow down the years that you're searching for. Now remember, just like ages and sometimes even birthplaces, information on the census is only as accurate as the person who gave that information to the census taker. For those of you who are new to genealogy, unlike today, where many of us fill out our own census forms, back then the census was generally taken by a census taker who went door to door. And he asked, or she asked, whoever answered the door, and if nobody was home, they might ask the neighbor. And so imagine if your next door neighbor was trying to give information about your age and birthplace and parents' birthplaces and immigration years, how off that might be. So again, we're using this information as clues. I love when it's consistent. When it's not, that doesn't make it invaluable. It just helps us kind of narrow that information down. So that's the 1910 census. On the 1920 census, citizenship information is found right here in columns 13, 14, and 15. Again, you're going to see the year that they immigrated, their naturalization status, and then this is really helpful, if they're naturalized, as in this case, the year that they were naturalized. Again, getting that information will help you track down what you need in order to discover when they immigrated and where from. Finally, on the 1930 census, that citizenship information is recorded way over here. I can't even read those column numbers. 22, 23, 24. There we go. Again, the year of immigration and the naturalization status. Now, if your ancestor was on more than one of these particular censuses, 1900 through 1930, don't just collect the information off of one of those censuses. Make sure you get it off of all of them. Again, if they all match, great, you're off to a good start. If they don't all match, it'll give you a range so that you can start to look for what it is that you need to find. The other major piece of U.S. research that you can do to locate your ancestors is going to be in naturalization records. Now, Ancestry.com has a large collection of federal naturalizations online. So if they were naturalized in a district court, chances are we have those petitions online. If they were naturalized in a county court, we might not have those yet, and so you might have to go to the county to get access to those. So here is just an example of a petition for naturalization. I don't know if you can see this. Let me make it a little bigger, right? Here he lists that he immigrated to the United States from Liverpool on or about the 22nd day of August in 1887, arrived in the United States at the port of New York on the 3rd day of September 1887 on the vessel City of Berlin, and there's the name of the ship. So you have the day and the name of the ship on that naturalization paperwork, so you don't have to go searching through all of the different men that have the same name or looking for all of the different possible misspellings or misinterpretations of what their name was to determine if you found the right person, because this naturalization paperwork gives you that information very specifically. Okay. So again, that piece of advice was just to exhaust all U.S. resources before diving in and searching the passenger lists. It's not because you're not going to find them necessarily. The biggest reason is just because oftentimes, even if you think your name is uncommon, the name that you're researching may be far more common than you realize. And so how do you tell the difference between, the 10 men who immigrated in between 1880 and 1883 who were named John Firth? The more information you have about them and about their family and about those immigration years, the better. And again, if you can get to that naturalization paperwork, you hit the jackpot, because oftentimes it will list that exact date and name of the ship so that you can go straight to it. Now, the second piece of advice that I'm going to give you is when you do find an ancestor on a passenger list, make sure to read every column and look for more information. This will help you again to narrow down that you have the correct person. Now, I'm going to do two things here. We're talking about New York passenger lists today, so let me just show you really quickly how to access those the easiest way. You can do your search here if you want. I would recommend that you actually go to the card catalog, and all you have to do is click on, after it comes up, click on immigration, and you'll notice that New York passenger lists is going to be the very first database that comes up. These are sorted by popularity. If you were to sort them by record count, you would see that it's still the top. 82 million records, almost 83 million records in this one collection. You'll notice that these records cover from 1820 to 1957. Now, when people say that they immigrated through New York, oftentimes our minds immediately jump to Ellis Island, but Ellis Island was not in operation until the early 1890s. Before that, the Port of New York immigration traffic was handled through Castle Garden, and before that, all the way back to 1820 in this particular database, it was just regular port traffic into the city, and so pay attention to that. Also, this collection goes through 1957. You may have recognized this when you have flown through an airport, but the Port Authority generally controls airports as well. And so not just will you find ship passenger lists, but you will also find airship or airplane passenger lists as well, many that go through the late 1950s. Here's your search box for this particular collection. Scroll down past it. Right, those of you who've listened to me before are getting used to that. You'll see exactly where Ancestry.com received this information. We got this information from the National Archives of the United States. These records originally were held by Customs, and before that they were held by, another set of those records were held by Immigration and Naturalization Service. You can see the year breakdowns here based on where those records came from. Now again, scroll down to the database description and you can read exactly what's been indexed in this collection, so you'll know what it is that you can search on. Now, one of the things that we get asked all the time is, well, I know my family came together, why can't I search on other people traveling with them? Well, the problem is that the passenger lists don't record relationship. And so we don't know what the relationship status is between people who may be listed next to one another on the passenger list, even if they have the same last name. Also keep in mind that even if they have different last names, they might also still be related. And so pay attention to the people who traveled with them, who else is listed on that passenger list with them. But this is the information that we indexed, so this is the information that you're going to be able to search on. Now, we also provide you with some tips for searching this collection to get the best results. I recommend that you go and read that so that you have that information available to you. Now, there are two ways to search passenger lists. Okay. The first one, we're going to use this example here of John Charles Firth, right? He says that he came into the Port of New York on the 3rd of September, 1887, and the name of the ship was the City of Berlin. On every database that contains images, we have a browse feature over here. So I could actually just search for him using this search box, or I could browse directly to him using this browse structure. So I can go to 1887, was it September? I should have written that down. September, and he said it was the 3rd, and look, no ship that came into port that day with that name. Now, of course, keep in mind it's been a couple of years since he immigrated, and so you can just work your way around until you find the name of the ship that you're looking for. Or again, what you can do is you can just search for him this way. Came from England, and he thinks he arrived in about 1887, and we'll click search. And what you'll see this brings up, here it is, 1st of September 1888 instead of the 3rd of September 1887. So he was maybe off by a year, and that happens a lot. People are remembering things years later, and so we do the best that we can with the information that we are given based on the memories of human beings who had failing memories sometimes. Now, here is an image of this particular passenger list in 1888. You'll notice, and this is a little frustrating for some of you, there are no column headings, right? So one of the things you need to do is to get familiar with what these columns represent. And the best way to do that, you can look that up on the wiki, the Ancestry wiki, or just look at this and see what information is provided, right? We've got names. This particular image is not fabulous. We've got years, we've got gender, occupation, probably a birthplace or where they're immigrating from, where they're headed to, and then we have some conditional information. It says good, so my guess is this is information about their physical health, and then some other information. So become familiar with what those column headings are. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice, and I'll bring up a couple of other examples here, is that every passenger list just about is a little bit different, right? Some of them are just one page and they look like they've got hand-drawn lines, and they probably were. They're on just blank pieces of paper. They're not an actual form of any kind. This particular record is from 1873. This one is from 1888, right? And so, you know, we've provided you with the best information that's available from the time, and it might require a little bit of effort to interpret what exactly is on that record and what it means. Some of them, like this particular record from 1938, are beautiful. This one's typed, it has lovely column headings, you know exactly what it is that you're looking at. But the further back in time that you go, the less consistent those forms are going to be, and the less readable even in some cases. So maybe spend a little bit of time with some of the more recent passenger lists so that you get familiar with what kinds of information is recorded, and then go looking for something in older passenger lists. Now, if you have a form in particular, one of the things that I'm going to remind you to do, because people forget often, is to always check to see if there's a second image. If I zoom out on this, right, you're going to see that this image is kind of an odd shape, right? It's not really portrait, it's not landscape, it's kind of square. These passenger lists were part of like ledger books, and there was often a second image or the other half of that book. And so when it was microfilmed, the National Archives just imaged one image at a time. And so you're going to want to make sure you check that second image to see if there's more information or if it goes across the page, right? And you just use these little arrows over here to do that. Now, when you get to that second image, if it exists, you need to make sure that you remember or have written down what line number your ancestor is on, because that's the only piece of information that's going to carry across between the two images. But the second image holds some really, really valuable information. Most specifically, this name, I love this column, the name and complete address of the nearest or relative or friend in the country where they came from, right? So what you're going to find out is who stayed behind. In this case, it's his wife or a son, his mother, right? And so you get information about where specifically they came from, not just, oh, they came from England, but they came from, from Gloucester, or they came from Surrey, right? Sometimes a very specific address, and oftentimes information about relatives, sister-in-law, aunt. I mean, you go through these, daughter, you'll start to see all sorts of nearest relatives, or how they define nearest relative. Okay. Also, if you look at these, you'll see who paid their passage. And that's not just interesting information to fill in the story, but sometimes it's also necessary information, right? Her husband paid her passage, or let's see, the husband paid the passage here, Rotary International paid the passage, a father, right? And so you start to make some of those connections about who's taking care of paying the passage for that person to come over. Again, another really important column in these New York passenger lists is this column about whether they were ever before in the United States. If so, when and where. Lots of times that answer is just going to be no, but every once in a while you're going to come across one that says yes. Particularly if your ancestors came from Italy. There was a period of time where Italians were the migrant workers of their day, and so they were called birds of passage. That was their nickname, and they would come every season and work in the United States for the season and then go back home to Italy. And so they would come and go quite a few times. So pay attention to that so that you can check previous and future passenger lists around that date. Because sometimes, a man would come every year, and then one year his teenage son comes with him. But then that teenage son stays, but the father keeps going back and forth, right? And so you want to look and see every single crossing to see who else is coming with them. Okay? Again, all of that information is generally found on this second page, and lots of years contain that second image. Now, back to this first image, just again so you know what kinds of information is available. Make it a little bit bigger there, right? You have their name and their age. You have their gender and their marital status, their occupation. Now again, you're going to oftentimes have to scroll up to the top here to see what these column headings are. You're going to learn about what language they speak and their literacy, if they are a citizen of what country, what race they consider themselves, the place of birth, which is different sometimes than the nationality or where they came from, right? So their place of birth, including the name of the city, which is fantastic information. You'll also list in later censuses, as the laws changed about immigration, you'll have information here about their passport or their visa, where and when that was issued, and then the last place that they lived. So again, you can end up with several different locations on here. You could have a birthplace, you could have a last permanent residence, you could have a citizenship, you could also have the hometown or residence of the nearest relative. So you'll end up with several different locations to start your research back in the old country as you find people on these passenger lists. Okay. Um, just a couple more pieces of information for you, and then we have to wrap up. If you find multiple people with the same name, trace each of them to find out what happened so that you can narrow it down. Now, what I mean by that is just because you plug in a name and that name comes up at the top of the list doesn't mean that's your ancestor. Again, look at that original record. Make sure that you copy down all that information or print it out or put it into your database so that you've got that, right? But what if there are 10 other men with the same name? You'll need to look at each of them, and sometimes you can right away exclude them, right? If it lists a wife or a parent or something that is contrary to information that you've already researched, then you can eliminate them. But sometimes, oftentimes, especially with single men or married men traveling alone from another country into the United States, it's hard to know which one's which. So what I'll do is I'll narrow it down as much as I can to 8 or 10 of them, and then I'll trace each of those men to see what happened to them, see if I can find naturalization paperwork on them, see if I can figure out where, after they got to New York, where they went to, look for them in the census. Once I can identify where they all are, then I can start to eliminate the ones that are not my relative, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll be on chat after this for a little bit, and you can ask me whatever questions you have about this specifically. I also just want to remind you that there are more records than just passenger lists. And so if you get stuck with passenger lists or need a little boost, again, those U.S. naturalization records are amazing resources if your ancestor became a citizen. Also, if they became a citizen and wanted to return to their country or go on vacation somewhere, we have a full collection of U.S. passport applications, which are great resources, again, for finding out about naturalization and immigration information. We also have some alien registration cards for people who did not become citizens. And remember that not everybody came directly into the United States. I have several ancestors who came into Canada and then crossed the border from Canada into the United States. Some immediately, right? They immigrated through Canada because it was cheaper at the time or whatever, and then their intention was all along to come into the United States. Some of them stayed in Canada for 2 or 3 years and then had business opportunities or other factors that affected their decision to migrate into the United States. So check those border crossings. We have those online for both Canada and Mexico, and they are available in the U.S. subscription. And see if maybe they didn't come into one of those ports and cross the border into the United States. And then this last thing is just a little kind of a fun thing for some of us. Once you've found your ancestor in the passenger list, you might want to check and see if we have an image of that particular ship. I just think it adds something to your family history and your family story if you have that image. Images tend to, in our society, evoke a lot of connection and a lot of emotion, and so you can see, this is the ship that my ancestor crossed the Atlantic Ocean on, and that's pretty powerful sometimes. And then you can share it with your children, and maybe they'll pay attention to family history if you can have something to connect that with them. Okay, that's all I've got today for you on New York immigration. Again, I just hope that you exhaust all your U.S. resources. Make sure that you're looking at all the columns on that. Don't give up. Immigration research is not easy, especially the further back in time you go, as the information on that passenger list becomes less and less information. So if you're patient and persistent, though, I'm certain that you'll find what you're looking for. This weekend is one of the biggest genealogy conferences of the year. It's RootsTech 2012. It will be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. That's February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And we will be streaming on live stream here several of the presentations over the weekend, and those will be available for free. So even if you can't be here in Salt Lake City for that, we hope that you'll join us online over the course of those 3 days and catch the presentations that we have going on. In the meantime, if you have a question for me and you're not able to stick around for chat, or if you're watching this on replay, I hope that you'll email me at ask@ancestry.com. We do read all of those emails and use them to put together these presentations and some information on our Tumblr blog, where Ancestry Ann answers those questions very specifically. Until next time, this is Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree and digging into those passenger lists.